Hi, in this video, I will give my personal answer to a question: what are the three most important variables in instructed second language learning? So, here they are. First, learners' motivation. Second, instructor education. And third, amount and quality of input and output. Let me explain them in more details. The first variable is learners' motivation. Roughly speaking, in his book Introduction to Instructed Second Language Acquisition, Lowen assumes learners already have motivation to learn language. More accurately, when he discusses instructed second language acquisition, he only considers cases where the two prerequisites are met. First, learners have intention to acquire and second, systematic manipulation of learning conditions are in place. But is it really the case in reality? Is it the right place to start our discussion about second language learning in classrooms? Surely, bilingual children might have enough motivation to learn the L2 language. Hispanic children from Mexican families in the US learning Spanish, for example. However, in many cases of English as foreign language circumstances, where English is a mandatory subject and students have no real need to use or learn it in daily lives, it is difficult for them to have an authentic motivation. It is easy for these EFL students to not pay attention or even feel resistant due to lack of motivation. Dun dun dun. In more technical terms, this is said to raise the affective filter, as mentioned by Krashen's input hypothesis. If a learner is low in motivation, low in self-confidence, and high in anxiety, you can think of an imaginary wall building up that blocks any input to go into your brain. Certain actions in the classroom that could raise it are making too much error correction, forcing output, putting learners in isolation without appropriate scaffolding, making learners feel embarrassed, or providing inputs that are incomprehensible by not considering their levels. So, what should we do about learners' motivation? Motivation is a tricky thing because its concepts and theories are too diverse and divided. Just to mention a few, we can divide it into instrumental versus integrative, pre-actional, actional, and post-actional, or trait versus state, and so on. But we would have to come up with something, right? So here's my personal suggestion that combines three things. World Englishes will serve in restructuring learners' reality or language landscape. Jordan Peterson will provide a push and pull frame. And Dornay and Scissor will provide 10 commitments for motivation in SLA context. Here it is. As we can see, first, the reality of English having spread around the world puts EFL learners to be one of English users, thus chasing them. On the other side, there is a goal where teachers are showing themselves as personal examples, students having clear goals for learning English, and culture allowing students to have some fun with learning the language. In order to boost motivation for the process of learning, numerous variables such as tasks, relationships, self-confidence, interests, autonomy, and personalized materials should be considered. The second variable for instructed second language learning. The second variable for instructed SLA is Instructor Education, which is also widely known as teacher training. Despite recent efforts to gear towards student-centered pedagogy, teachers are nonetheless the captain of a ship called class. That said, a teacher's contextual understanding can make huge differences in class. For instance, test design, types of feedback, appropriate input, scaffolding, peer pairing, and so on all depend on a teacher's overall knowledge and skills. In addition, an instructor's education is a major link for research and pedagogy, as it is usually the case that teachers are thrown into the field after this period. I cannot emphasize enough about instructor education. Let's go back to the basics and see the Lowen's definition of instructed SLA. It is by definition assumed that one of the main characteristics is the systematic manipulation of learning conditions, which is done by teachers. However, a problem is that teachers are simply out of time to read articles, and when teachers are not well informed by research, a worst case would be teachers just following the textbooks, which results in a very boring class. So, what can we do about it? Mainly, teacher education programs should provide pre-service teachers with up-to-date research. However, it would be even better if conferences could make themselves more approachable for in-service teachers. An example of making research more approachable is OASIS, which allows time-deprived teachers to re-summarize contents of recent research. The third variable for successful instructed SLA is the amount and quality of input and output. Within the SLA field, there are so many theories and complex concepts for learning. So it would be frustrating, and it is easy to think what all this fuss is all about. But practically speaking, it all really comes down to answering the question of when, where, what, who, how, and why for appropriate input and output should take. In my opinion, for input and output, we should do all we can afford for a successful SLA. However, there are things to keep in mind. For input, we should be aware that there are systematic language developmental stages which are supported by scholars such as Krushen and Pianeman. Next, we should also sometimes teach language explicitly as informed by Michael Long. Although whether or not explicit teaching actually leads to language acquisition is still debated, even for the sake of making students feel like they have learned something, is itself valuable. Now for the output. We should remind ourselves that output allows students to notice the gap between their current level and the target level as suggested in output hypothesis. Also, even when putting away the dispute whether speaking and writing is a skill rather than part of a language, it is still acknowledged that structured output leads to improved fluency and accuracy. Finally, the conclusion. Although no one single ultimate form of class can fit the diverse contexts of classrooms, if guided by principles supported by findings, teachers can make improvements in classrooms. Thank you for listening to my thoughts on 3 most important variables for a successful instructed SLA.